I had the conversation with the CEO and I said, I'm going to slash your pipeline in half. But what I will return is a 500% ROI on your marketing dollars. Can you trust me with that? And I said, yeah. And that's what we did.
Welcome back to Revenue Remix. I'm Summer Paletti, your host and founder of Rise of Us, where I help founders and CEOs avoid wasting money, momentum, and reputation on growth strategies that fall flat. My guest today has been in the demand gen trenches longer than most people have actually been using that term. She's a 3-time in-house head of demand gen turned founder. She built a successful podcast during COVID before everybody like me was doing a podcast that helped marketers cut through the noise. And now she's back with a new show, Her Path to Revenue. Because apparently one podcast wasn't enough of a challenge. She runs Elevate Growth, where she helps B2B SaaS companies in the $5 million to $15 million mark build pipeline that actually converts without adding headcount. Hello, that's my jam. Her clients have seen close loss ratios drop from 48 to 11% in a single quarter, not by adding leads, by fixing the right problem. Okay, so we just recorded together on her show, and I walked away knowing that we had only scratched the surface on pipeline because our work seems like it's so aligned. So she is here to finish the conversation. And if you didn't catch my episode with her show, I will drop that in the notes so that you can check her show out. She is a pro. And so she's here to talk about what actually takes to build and scale a demand gen engine that holds up in today's market, because it's very different than 2022. So enough of me talking. Welcome, Janelle.
Hi, hello. So excited to be here.
Well, clearly, I'm excited to have you here. When somebody says the thing, I cannot help but go a little bananas. So before we get into pipeline, we feature the whole person here. So let's go way back. What is something that you've done or that you're working on that would make little Janelle very proud?
That's a really sweet question. And I'll preface with a small story. If you know me, you know this is not going to be a surprise. But for those that don't, my personality is very sassy. It is very bossy, and we make decisions well and quickly. That was a trait that I held as a little girl as well. There are stories of me standing in line, roller coaster, tickets, snow cones, whatever it was. I don't even know what the line was. But another girl had cut in front of me, and my whole face went, no, she didn't. Everybody around me was like, whoo, like, what is she gonna do? And, so it's been known since I've been a kid that I've got a little bit of a spice behind me. As I grew up and entered corporate and the working field, that was not always appreciated. I was told that I was too bossy, or I was told that I should smile more in meetings. And I could go on and on about the things that have been spoken to me, or that I am dressing too nicely for the level of my role. And I would say being able to run Elevate Growth and be a founder of me and my brand would give little Janelle that sense of pride and ownership to be able to say, it doesn't matter what you think of me. I know I'm a good human being. I know my intentions are well, and I am now able to only work with folks who get that and want quality work and want to work with somebody who can actually move the needle and has quality work ethic. So going back to my sassy, oh no, she didn't face to where we are today, I would definitely say that's a proud Janelle moment.
That because I think we know now the way that we're raising our daughters, that's a little boss right there. And you should not tell her to stop being a boss. Like, that is a leadership skill right there in a little package. I love that.
It is.
Yeah. And I think like every woman has been told, you're too much. You're too, like, stop. So I'm glad you're building things on your own terms right now. That feels very powerful. Okay, so let's talk demand gen. You ran demand gen in-house 3 times across B2B SaaS companies, and those are men's worlds, okay? That's my world too. Like, I know how hard that is. What did you keep seeing other than those things that made you realize that you needed to leave and build something of your own?
That's a great question. The answer is twofold. So I'll start with the one that may not be known to your audience and then more towards the working side of things. The first one is I didn't see a gap in the market and decide I needed to go build that solution. The reason why I broke out is because I was at one of those in-house head of demand gen roles, and within the first 30 days of joining, was asked to make a decision that I didn't feel was ethical. And so I had half of people in my ear saying, that's corporate for you, no big deal. And I had the other half in my ear saying, don't ever let a company define who you are, what you stand for, like whatever. And so that was the real reason why I broke out on my own, just full transparency. I didn't have the 6-month savings. I didn't have dreams of being a business owner. I didn't have, I'm going to build this great product that's going to solve this need in the market that I'm seeing. None of that. Just a leap of faith and a lot of resilience, grit, and the pressure to provide for the family. And so to go back to your question of what were some of the things that I was seeing at the time, and this was 6 or more years ago, roles in marketing were very individualized and siloed. So, for example, you had people who were a web developer. You had people who specialized in SEO. You had people who specialized in PPC. There's nothing wrong with mastering a trade, but those individual team members only knew that trade and they only could see through the lens of that trade. And so I started asking the questions, what if this trade connects to that trade, that connects to this trade, that connects to the business story? What if we could create something that was unified instead of siloed? So I started learning those worlds, and I was fortunate to be in startups where you can wear multiple hats and plug and play and see everything right, wrong, or indifferent, good, bad, and ugly. And I started asking those questions and testing and finding a way to bring all of these motions together so that it would create a story of how marketing was using these siloed tactics to influence sales, leads, revenue, pipeline, etc. So that was the early stages. But I would say that that's going back to your question, what I saw that I wanted to make sure as an offering years later that I had no idea was going to come when I was going to be a business owner would solve for that is how do we connect everything to the business?
Yeah, you accidentally made a COVID-proof marketing agency, so good on you. And I love that you stood your ground because I feel like little Janelle would not have wanted you to do the unethical thing.
Well, and
Not at all.
honestly, my daughter, she was 5 months old at the time, and it
Oh,
just didn't sit right in my gut to tell her to, be ethical, to be bold and brave, to do right in this world. Like, there's enough darkness as it is. And then for me to turn my back and be an entire hypocrite and go do the thing that I'm telling her not to do, like, I have to be that walking example for my family. And I couldn't sleep with that at night. And so I knew I had to do something. I didn't know I was going to go, flip a middle finger to corporate and like create a whole like LLC. But like here we are almost 5 years later. But anyways, I digress.
flipping the middle finger to corporate, by the way. It's all good. Okay, so then I want to talk podcasts. We're on a podcast. You were an early adopter of B2B podcasts, and Demand Gen Made Simple launched during COVID era when we were figuring out a whole lot of new things. So that's interesting that you tried that. And you built a real following. What did running that show teach you that led you to where you are today?
Yeah, and just for toot my own horn really quick so everybody knows, Demand Gen Made Simple hit the top 20% in Spotify and top 15% no shared globally. So for the record,
Nice.
thereafter, what it has taught me was two things. One was grit, is that whatever you put in is what you get out. As I had shared earlier, I didn't have dreams of being a business owner. I didn't have the 6-month savings. So I knew I had to figure out something fast. And I knew that I had to put in a whole lot of work, and there was a really big mountain for me to climb. And I had never done a podcast before, but hell, I can learn. And so that's what I did. So it's a lot of failure, it's a lot of testing, it was a lot of resilience. And at the end of the day, it was a lot of grit. And I think whatever you put into it is what you're going to get out, just as a mindset, as an entrepreneur, as a founder, as a marketer, as a mom, as a wife. And so that was one of the things that I learned is how can I, or what do I need to do to make this podcast successful and do that. The
Nice.
second thing is network. It's having people in your corner who are in your favor. The more people who can refer you, hey, you got to talk to this person, or hey, you remind me of that person. Those word of mouth, those referrals, those connections, that ecosystem that you build over time was the reason that Elevate Growth has stayed afloat the last couple of years and the reason why it's continued on, hopefully, forecasting in the next years to come. But I would say just grit and network at the end of the day.
Yeah. Having launched a podcast going on 2 years ago now, I launched in 24, so there's just a lot more business podcasts out there. There's a lot more noise to cut through. And the first few months were really tough, and I'm like, "Okay, I'm gonna continue doing this because I built a plan and I believed in it, but like, no one listens, and you're like, okay, I poured an hour into that, and like it got 5 downloads, and I know that one of those was me. It's tough, but yeah. So that grit and that resilience, like you got to stick it through. You have your plan, you believe in your plan, and you stick it through, and then all of a sudden, at some point in time, you're an overnight success.
Well, the thing that I kept coming back to as a marketer is it's the same lesson that I preach to founders and to other C-levels is you're not going to see the results overnight. One, I knew podcast was a long-term play. I didn't expect to immediately get like change in, change out type of thing. I knew that it needed the compound growth. But then two, going back to me always being too good of a person, I guess, was what type of hypocrite would I be if I'm telling all my clients that we've got to wait at least a quarter, we've got to wait at least a year to see the results before we can strategically pivot if I didn't even do that, like walk my own walk. And so, a little bit of grit, resilience, insanity, label it what you want.
Yes, I call it taking your own medicine because we both run growth architecture businesses that we have to architect the growth of. And so, yeah, there's a lot of like, okay, if I were a client, I would be telling me that this strategy is not going to prove itself in 6 weeks and stop acting like a maniac. So it's funny. Yes, I feel that right to my core. So then you launched another show. And when I heard of it, I was like, oh my God, I need this in my life. Her path to revenue. It's still you, but it's a very different lens. So what made you wanna tell that story instead of just continuing with what was already really successful?
And that's a great question. I'll backtrack a little bit just so your audience has kind of the full circle. So, with that Demand Gen Made Simple show, as I mentioned, some of the Spotify stats that it hit, Sixth Sense, if you all are familiar with the space, actually sponsored me back in 2026 to be an on site podcast host at their annual breakthrough event. So, when you couple the hustle, the need to provide, and the tenacity to not fail, there's a lot of effort that went behind that. And needless to say, I burnt myself out fast. Last year, personally, was a really big year for us as well. We had moved, little one started school full time, 5 days a week. So I was recovering from that burnout and found myself, for the first time in my motherhood journey, capacity to think, capacity to create, and capacity to iterate. And I started networking again and having conversations, both with male and female. But the more females that I talked to, the more that I realized, I was borderline venting, I should say. I started with the venting. But the more that I realized that being a founder and motherhood is hard. And I was complaining about the balancing and when those two worlds collide. And if she's sick, she stays home. I push my whole meetings. I have two different brains. I've got mom brain, I've got work brain. And I can't perform at 100% when those two worlds collide. So I was venting to all the friends and women in my network. So thank you for the venting sessions that they have provided me. What I learned, though, from speaking with women who are older, wiser, stronger than me, is that my story wasn't alone. Everybody gave me advice. They said me too. They shared personal stories. It was incredible. And that's when I learned that these stories just aren't told. Like women show up 9 to 5 and then close down, and between 5 and 9, 5 and midnight, whatever time, deal with something else, whether that is motherhood, whether that's being a caregiver to a family member that has special needs, whether that is struggling to conceive and going home excited to take a pregnancy test only for it to come back negative, whether that is freezing eggs, whether that is fill in the blank. At the end of the day, we show up the next day smiley, leading teams forward, putting plans together, stepping into rooms where we have to have this alter ego come out and be strong. And I felt like there was a calling for me and for others to share that story. So that's what her path to revenue is all about. It's talking about how these powerhouse women are leading companies forward, the strategies that they're using, but then also showcasing the personal side of it. And while doing X is the story. So that's
Mm,
the mission behind her path to
yeah.
revenue.
No, I love it. I saw it and I was like, "Oh my god," because my career started to take off, and then I found out I was pregnant with my daughter, and I was like, "Shit, like, what am I gonna do?" I was, like, newly promoted to director level, and I knew that it was gonna be really hard. I traveled a ton when she was really little through, like, junior high because that was COVID, and then everything just changed. Oh god, it was so hard. It was so hard, being on the road for a week and having her cry at daycare because she thought I disappeared and was never gonna come back, and then I'm like, "But I gotta do that for my work," and I missed so many things, like, the sacrifices that you make, and even if you have a helpful spouse at home, when they're really little, they want mom. Even if you have a good partner at home, they want mom.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and nobody talks about that because you don't get to talk about that and bring your whole self to work. I love that we get to bring our whole selves to work now. So, yay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I also learned that career paths aren't linear. And I feel like that's a story that we're told entering the workforce is that you start as assistant, coordinator, specialist, manager, director, VP,
Mhm.
fill in the blank, whatever's next. And I've also learned I don't think there's a single woman that I've had on the show who has had a linear career path. And so what I want to showcase is that that's okay.
Yes. I love normalizing stuff. It's great. Let's see. So, I do want to get back to talking about demand gen because we're here to talk about pipeline.
Let's do
So,
it.
a lot has changed since ChatGPT came out and blew up everything. But let's start with what's the single biggest shift that you see when we talk about building pipeline?
You're not going to like my answer, but I'm going to say it anyways.
All good.
One would assume that the biggest shift is I had to learn AI or I had to integrate AI or I had to leverage AI. Because it's the hype right now. Everyone's either buying technology so that we can do AI faster, or they're repositioning their company's own product and learning at how to position that product in the market against competitors. It's one of the two right now. What has changed is I've always believed marketing fundamentals is critical to moving business growth. So what has changed is actually me having to educate more and again on the reason why we're doing something. In a world where we have to go fast, we have to leverage AI, growth at all costs, and we have technology and we need to cut headcount and how do we become more efficient and faster and better? Let's take a step back. Let's look at how many pieces of tech already do the same thing. Let's start there. Let's systematize how we even use these technologies before we go spend more money somewhere else. And then from there, let's talk about the purpose and objective for each of the technologies, for each of the channels, for each of the tactics, for each of the budgets. And that's something I would not have forecasted I'd be at with the way digital marketing and demand gen was evolving the last couple of years. But with how fast AI has taken off, that's been something that I've really had to slow down in my consultative phase with clients and really re-educate what marketing fundamentals are, ensuring that we have those. And then from there, well, we can see the same story and evolution with account-based marketing too. The acronym for ABM, so many people, it was a tide wave that people wanted to ride. And CEOs would hear the term when they're golfing on a Saturday and then go to the CMO and say, we need to be doing ABM. The whole company would flip in a night. And then next thing you know, they'd have an ABM forward strategy.
And a
It's the
really
same
expensive
thing.
piece of tech they didn't use.
You know what I mean? And then, 5 years later, if you say the word ABM, everyone's like, "Oh, no, we did ABM, it didn't work." Like, whoop, and there's so much PTSD behind it. But it's not that ABM as a tactic isn't successful. It's not that you should or could not find success in it. It's that we needed to go back to the fundamentals. So when I work with companies who have been quote unquote burned by ABM or have PTSD with it not working before, we eliminate the terminology entirely and we talk about it in a whole different way. And all of a sudden that makes sense. So it's the same thing with AI that I'm seeing. If we eliminate the hype word of AI altogether and we look at what we're actually trying to achieve, things make more sense. How I go solve that on the back end with technology leveraging AI is none of your damn business. I need alignment on what
Love it.
we're working
Yes.
on together so that we can be in lockstep for growth.
Love it. I tell people to start with the objective. From my lens, sometimes it's a tech thing, sometimes it's a structure thing, and sometimes it's a behavior thing. And so we don't know. Let's find the objective first and then figure out the best way to get there. Sometimes it's AI and sometimes it's not. Start with your goal instead of feeling like, oh my God, we got to AI this. It's like in the 2000s, you had to go in the cloud. And in the 90s, you had to be a .com, and now in the nows, you have to be AI. Like, it's just we never learn. Anyway, so now I want to pivot and spend the next 20 minutes or so on some pipeline. So what I said on your show, and it's funny because I love controversial statements sometimes, is that companies, you don't need pipeline, you don't need more leads. Most companies that I see, they don't necessarily have a pipeline problem. They have a systems problem. From my side of the house, when I work with my marketing partners, they're like, okay, I'm generating leads and I'm starting to look bad because the sales system isn't there to convert those leads. The customer success motion isn't there to retain those clients. And so I want to explore that a little bit. So let's talk about, just give me your demand gen expert take on my you don't need pipeline hot take.
I actually agree with you. And I'll give you a real world scenario. I had a client who had loads and loads of pipeline. I mean, we're talking like X. And in a perfect world, most executives love 10x pipeline. And they
Yeah.
love ACVs that are like 300K, right? All this looks good on paper. But when none of them, and I'm not exaggerating, are close winning, that's a very expensive
Yes, right?
department. And so what I stepped into was that scenario. And I had the conversation with the CEO and I said, I am going to slash your pipeline in half.
Woo,
Well, right?
I know, right? They're
But
like,
what
yeah.
but what I will return is a 500% ROI on your marketing dollars. Can you trust me with that? And I said, yeah. And that's what we did.
Wow.
So
Nice.
it's not necessarily that we have a pipeline problem. The problem wasn't pipeline. The problem was that, to your point, we didn't have an effective targeting. We didn't have effective follow-up. We didn't even have the leads getting to the people. There was no notifications. Things were going south, sideways, up in the air, who knows? And so there's a lot that we needed to fix fundamentally and rebuild from the ground up. And one, it started with just redefining the ICP. We weren't selling to the right people. And then from there, it was redoing our offers and our pricing strategy. We were very
Mm,
expensive compared to competitors. And so we had to reevaluate our placement and our messaging. And eventually all those ships aligned. And that's when we were able to retrieve, it was 590 something percent, close to about 600% ROI
nice.
with
Yeah,
marketing.
I believe it. Wow. There's a lot of little nuggets that we could pick on. But yes, I think that the challenge I always see is when it's not working, they're like, oh my God, pipeline's not converting. We need more. It's like, hold
Mhm.
on. Quick pause. The questions I ask when I'm on this show, the topics we talk about, these are the same things I see when I run diagnostics and retainers for growth stage companies. Why is revenue stuck? What's breaking? What should leadership own to fix it? What should you do most importantly now? What should you do, but it's less urgent and you can do it later? Most leaders think they need more leads, more pipeline, maybe even another salesperson. But the real issue is usually revenue architecture. Sales, marketing, customer success, and partnerships, they're all drifting apart or they're not systemized. This is what my diagnostic uncovers, and it's custom to your business. I don't bring the same deck to every company. Growth is way too nuanced for that. If you've been listening to the show and thinking, I'm not sure what's costing us revenue, I'm not sure exactly what to do, that is what my diagnostic is for. DM me on LinkedIn if that might be useful to you. All right, back to the conversation. You want a even bigger jammed pipeline? Because you're gonna be 10x frustrated, right?
10x frustrated. I love that. And candidly, that's why companies pull me in. Shameless plug is they've done all the right things. They've hired the right people, they've built all the right campaigns, they've implemented the right tech. But at the end of the day, leadership takes a step back and they scratch their heads and they're like, what's missing? And that's when, I call myself a corrective operator, steps in and help them relook at what is it that we're actually here to do? What are we doing? What's the disconnect? What do we need to be
Yeah.
doing? And then help them actually do that.
Yeah. And I get people nervous about like, I'm going to throw everything out and make them build entirely from scratch. But really, it's like, no, no, no. We're going to scale what's working and kill what doesn't ruthlessly. But it's a surgical precision. It's like that product isn't delivering. I don't care that it's your brainchild. It's got to go. This client, I don't care that they're your neighbor. They're a loss leader. They got to go. And then like, you're missing this, you're missing this, you're missing this. Let's bolster it. And, I feel like it's more of like a tune up than a rebuild. So I like that work. It is so fun, by the way. So let's see. So I'm going to beat up on salespeople because I get to do that because they're my people and I do it with love. It is the wet noodle. It is the velvet glove, whatever. But like, I know because I was leading corporate sales team during demand gen's heyday when inbound was cranking and leads were coming in, volume was high, and salespeople just kind of got to take the lead and convert it. But volume is down now. Buyers have changed the way that they buy. It started in COVID. They're arriving later and later in the journey. And then suddenly sales feels like they have to do more with less. So, first of all, I think they need to put on their big boy pants and go make some calls. However, from the demand gen side, what does it look like when you're building for that self educating buyer who doesn't want but like actually needs the consultative salesperson to guide them? What does demand gen look like today when it's working?
Yeah, I would label it as journalism. So, and what I mean by that is you have to get to know your ideal customer very, very well. You have to
Mm,
understand what is holding them back from having that conversation. What is that flip of switch between want versus need? And what are the risks? And what are the reasons why they wouldn't buy? If we can understand that, then we go to our sales team and we understand how do you normally consult them? What are the questions that they normally ask? What are some of the objections? What are some of the collateral that you normally go through? And how do we find a way to support self educating buyers right now without you so that when they do come to you, your conversations are a lot easier and they're faster and they're a lot more fun because you're doing less convincing and you're doing more guiding if we can do all that in advance. But that doesn't just come by guessing. That doesn't come by just whipping up something because it feels good. It comes from some journalism and some investigative skills to put two and two together. And candidly, maybe some hypothesis and some testing before you get it right. But I would start there and say, how do we get as much information in front of them as possible so that we can have that positive influence and be the brand that they think of when they're ready to make that next move? And then how do I guide my sales team to inherit them at that point in their journey, meet them where they are, and continue to support them so that they can close? And then part of what you're really good at is now how do we nurture them once they do close and make sure that they never leave and we're their favorite brand forever?
yes, yes. My God, I love that you said journalism because, see, you're on the marketing side and you're better at messaging than I am. I am a punchy sales leader. I've been calling it like, oh God, like you're building a case, like you're a prosecutor.
Practically.
But that's a little investigative journalism is so much better. I'm going to try to remember that because, you know, it's just better. A little softer, right?
Yeah, I'd probably say it's a little softer.
Yeah. Maybe those people who said I was too much were a little bit correct, right?
Never.
Okay. So let's get back to diagnostics as you're investigating for your journalistic story. So you go in to diagnose a lead gen or pipeline. What is the fastest signal that tells you that the real problem is not with marketing and it is with sales? Like, what is your number one? Okay.
That's a great question. I have a proprietary framework that I use. It's a spreadsheet where we walk through marketing's overall investment, how that trickles down through the funnel, opportunity, cost per demo, et cetera, all the way through ROI and the percentage of marketing's return on investment. And so what that does is it helps me clearly identify where in the funnel the gaps are, whether that is marketing, whether that's sales, whether that's the number of dollars that we're investing inside of marketing. It makes it very clear night and day. It's objective, it's data. I can use that to talk to the CFO. I can use that to talk to the CMO. I can use that to talk to the campaign specialist. It is universal. It's my favorite thing ever. It's the first thing that I do when I work with clients. I do a state of the land analysis, and then I do after we're done working together and we look at
Mhm.
the results. I digress. When I
Yes.
get through the funnel and I see that something is breaking between the marketing and sales handoff, that tells me two things. One, marketing could still be at fault. Are the leads not right? Are they misaligned? Is the product not there? Something's missing, right? Or two, what is sales doing with the follow-up? Is there something broken on that side? So then again, we take step backs and we go and we investigate both of those avenues and we figure out which one it truly is. Do we need to reevaluate our ICP or do we need to implement systems on the sales side so that things don't fall through the cracks? Do we need more experienced reps? Do we need better positioning, collateral? Like something's missing, right? So that's the first thing, and I identify that at the beginning of every engagement. So it makes it very clear without all the finger pointing for us to actually have like objective conversations.
Nice. I like that. So, from the sales side, they're not doing enough follow up, and there's data that backs that. It comes from a Gartner survey or research, and it's like it takes 22 touches, and on average, sales gives up after four. So, it's always follow up. Even when it's lead quality, it's always follow up. I don't know why. The good news, though, is they used to give up after one. So we're making progress, but like buyers are moving faster than sellers. So sometimes it's just an adjusting a behavior thing. And I love that you start with like a framework and data and all that. When I go in, it's all conversations just because, that's how I roll. And then the
Yeah, that's part of
conversations, of
it.
course, will go into a diagnostic tool, but it starts with I want to talk to customer success. I want to talk to onboarding. I want to talk to sales. And then
Mhm.
actually, my last conversation is to go to the head of marketing with all my stuff. And then we figure out like how we can align to move the ball forward. And I start with like customer success because they have all the goodies. They
Mhm.
have all of the clever use cases and what clients actually like about the system or the service. And I think it's becoming more important than ever to use like actual voice of the customer, because they're asking ChatGPT using their conversational language, so that there's just a whole bunch of gold nuggets in client success. If you are ignoring them, do it at your own peril.
Yeah, interviews are super important. And to play off of what you just said, it's important to go horizontal, but then also vertical. I go up and down the chain in the own marketing department as well as sales. If somebody has been there for 5 years, I love using this term. You'll hear me branded if you guys like watch any of the other podcast interviews I've been on. But I like to know where the bodies are buried. I like to know what happened a couple years ago where things went south. And so in addition to meeting with the other departments, I've got to meet with those who have been the individual contributors or the operators who knows why things are actually breaking but don't have the authority or maybe the confidence to have brought that up previously. And so if they can tell me confidentially, then, as I step into these fractional marketing roles, I can then bring that over to the rest of the C-suite and advocate for them and help them make that change if it truly is, the direction that we need to go.
Oh yeah, no, if you only talk to leadership, you're doing yourself a disservice because the frontline folks, they know stuff to your point that they don't want to admit, but they'll admit it to an outsider. And I'm super careful about protecting my sources going into the investigative journalism again,
Journalism.
right?
You
I
see,
like
you
the
see where I'm going there?
necessary. That is kind of a me thing. I want to know that. Too many murder podcasts over here. Okay. So it's funny because I talked to a friend of mine who has a corporate role and she's the head of marketing. And she doesn't, it's funny when you do the work that we do and you might see 20 companies in a year, if not more. You get a different perspective being the outsider, right? And she's like, "Oh no, sales and marketing alignment, that's not a thing anymore. It's good. We're totally aligned." And I was like, "Oh, every marketer I talk to talks about how it's still kind of a challenge." So, if you could change one thing about how marketing and sales actually talk to each other in like a scaling messy middle B2B tech company like that we all work with, like what is one thing you would do to get them to work better together or to communicate better?
I say this from what I've actually implemented before, but they're called smarketing meetings. And so there's a lot of sales versus marketing or sales and marketing. And if we combine the two, it's called smarketing. And you could also do revenue team or go to market team. I've seen both of those, are very popular as well. But if we stop saying it's us versus them, and if we're a collective team, then we work as a team. It's not us versus them. And so having that calendar invite monthly or sometimes even weekly or biweekly, depending on how much
Mhm.
traction and mountain
Yeah.
we've got to climb. But that's where I have found would be really useful in aligning conversations and really making sure that we're on the same page as we're looking to grow. And especially if we have aggressive goals, we've got to do it in lockstep. There's no room for error here.
Yeah. And I'm going to add one to that. I love team because it's all the same team. Like you work for the same company, right? I'm going to add that I will not allow CEOs to say, "Oh, that's just how they are." No,
No.
no. You are allowing the type of behavior that is causing friction in your organization and killing your traction. So,
Mhm.
no, that's not how Jimmy is. Tell Jimmy to get his shit together. Stop
Yeah.
being a jerk.
I've actually told a CEO and I said, "Well, if that's what the performance you want for this company, then that's on you. Or we could go and do this and you could see X, Y, and Z percent increase. You tell me what your vision is," right? You throw
Yeah.
the word vision in there. And then they reflect on it because, numbers never lie. You always come in objectively. And then they're like, maybe we'll give it a shot. I'm like, okay,
Yes.
that's what
Maybe
I
we'll
thought.
give not fighting with each other a shot. Okay. Boy, I love it. Okay. So we're going to wrap up, and I have one last question for you, and it has nothing to do with B2B or revenue. I like to bookend it with like making a person a human being. So we just swapped shows, which makes us podcast buddies now. So since we're both fairly public facing on LinkedIn and other platforms, as you have to be when you run your own business, I want to know the tea always. What is something that might surprise people who only know the LinkedIn you?
Fair question. I grew up as an athlete. I
Woo!
played volleyball, basketball. I did a short sprint of college basketball. I got a
Mm,
scholarship, and I did gymnastics as well.
mm,
And within that, I also tore my meniscus. I fractured a vertebrae in my back, and most recently in August, tore my shoulder, thinking I was 15 again playing water volleyball. So, uh, can I say retired athlete? Once in the old golden days, your girl played basketball. I actually, shameless plug, I did a solo episode on her path to revenue, if you guys want to check it out, talking about the connection that I had being an athlete to marketing and sales. So
mm.
I'll just do a short teaser here if that's okay. But
Yeah.
if we look at the game of volleyball, you have a setter and you have a spiker. And the setter's job is to put the ball exactly where it needs to go on the other opposite end of the court. So they're scanning the defense and they're looking at where the gaps are. And then they set that ball so the spiker can come and take the hit right in the gap and the team can win the point. So the setter's job is to always be looking out, planning, and setting things up. The spiker's job is to come in and make the kill. And I learned that that's actually very similar with marketing and sales. Marketing comes in and sets it all up and does the marketing and the positioning and the messaging and the campaigns and the self-educating and the collateral. Sales comes in and takes the kill. Like, we've got to work together. And so when a setter does this so beautifully, everybody cheers and it's like flawless. And it's just like, that's the way volleyball's supposed to go. If a setter messes up, everybody notices. So anyways, there's an episode where I deep dive into more
Yeah.
into that, but it's, growing up as an athlete that helped shape how I approach my revenue journey over the years and with clients.
Yeah. No, I didn't have broken anythings. I was an aquatic athlete, but torn thises and that's. My shoulder always hurts, even when I'm sleeping. I played water polo, so this motion, it really hurts. So yes, but I love taking the sports lessons and applying them to work because really it's about high achieving. It's about
Right.
bettering your own best record. It's about teamwork. And like back when I was in my corporate days, like I don't want a salesperson who never played a sport. Okay, so we're going to wrap this up and get you back to your day. I appreciate you joining me, Janelle. This was a fun and informative conversation that I know the audience is going to love. And I will drop all of your everything in the show notes so folks can find you and your new show and Elevate and all of it. And then if you are listening from the gym or the car, I appreciate you too. And I will see you next week. Bye now.